Hey everybody, I hope you guys had a good break. This is a video that I'm super excited to share with you because everything we've done this semester in terms of the annotated bibliographies, in terms of framing quotations, in terms of interpretation versus summary, being able to differentiate between secondary sources that illustrate and secondary sources that are critical and reference sources, it all is going to culminate here in your final research project. And I'm a big believer in this organizational strategy that I'm about to teach you. I learned it way too late. I wish I would have known it during my first years in college. I would have been way more successful and would have been more excited about writing had I known that. So without any more build-up, we're going to get right into it. I call this the 6 parts of research essay supremacy, but you can see I got a little asterisk up there, and I want to make one thing absolutely clear. What I'm going to be teaching you is how to arrange a deductive argument in the humanities. This is not something you're going to want to use for lab reports or anything that involves primary research that you're doing in a laboratory. And I want you to bear in mind that there's a lot of different ways to organize evidence. I've just found that this is the best way to start. Students are really concerned about length of their papers and how they're going to, say in English, for example, write a 25-page senior thesis. It's like this. It's organized in this way, or it can be organized in this way. So if you found yourself ever wondering how you're going to make anything longer than 3 paragraphs or 5 paragraphs, this video is going to be for you. But just bear in mind that it's not going to be a fix-all. You can probably use this strategy I'm going to teach you in religion classes, any humanities classes, anything that involves interpretation that has an argument. Whereas when we're looking at the sciences, we're doing a different methodology. So a little overview of the 6-part arrangement strategy. First, it's called the Ciceronian strategy because it was developed and first introduced by a Roman orator named Cicero. He was an advisor to Julius Caesar. When we think about and talk about arrangement, we usually start with the Ciceronian arrangement strategy. The 5-paragraph essay is based on that. But what it's done is it's compressed these 6 parts into paragraphs, and I don't think that's necessarily helpful. In this case, it's taken the first 3 parts and slammed it into an introductory paragraph, and then it's taken the proof and chopped it up into 3 body paragraphs, and then it's taken the final 2 parts and smashed it into a conclusion. I'm not a big fan of the 5-paragraph essay after we get out of high school. But I do think that you need to know it in order to appreciate this. Fun fact about Cicero is he ran afoul of the folks that were conspiring to assassinate Julius Caesar, so they murdered him and cut off his hands and nailed them on the door of the Roman Senate. So that's a fun little historical story. The 6 parts go in this order. In the exordium, you are giving your audience the problem and the stakes. You are answering the so what question immediately. It's really important that we get that out of the way because a lot of times our audience is left wondering, well, who cares about story A and story B? Why does it matter? If you do your exordium correctly, you're setting the stakes immediately and answering that so what question right off the bat. The next part is the background, the narration, and this is answering the question, how did we get here, who's involved? We're trying to give our audiences a sense of the conversation before we give our point on it. Then comes the division. The division is how is your research, your idea, approach, how is it different from what already exists? Proof. Here is where we do our primary evidence summary, and we have the scenes that support the terms of our argument. Refutation. This is the devil's advocate spot. and then our conclusion. This is where we sum up, amplify, stir emotions, and call to action. At this point in the video, I'm going to pause and I'm going to request that you stop this video and you start the one that's right below it, and it is going to be an infomercial. It's going to be an infomercial that is going to try to sell you a thing called the Snap-on Smile. So pause this video right here. Now go watch the other one, and then we'll come back in a second. All right, I'm going to guess that you stopped. If you didn't stop, there was a weird 20-second spot right there where I just kind of gazed off. But in order for the rest of this thing to make sense, you're going to have seen that commercial, and I'm going to be referencing some spots in it. So let's start off with the exordium, the introduction. Your mantra when you are writing your exordium is to show the stakes and illustrate the problem. Don't tell us about it. Show us in some way. Give us an image. Secondary research is really helpful here. Here's where we can give a statistic. Here's where we can give an anecdote, if not from our lives, then a life outside. We want to demonstrate that crucial issue, that big idea that you're going to be exploring when you interpret your two texts, is really evocative, that it's evoking the emotion you want out of your audience. Here is where I'm going to remind you that we've got generally 3 different ways to use secondary research. And in the exordium, we are going to be illustrating. We want to find a source that illustrates what we mean by our central term or demonstrates the stakes in some evocative way. Do's and don'ts. Do not start your papers with rhetorical questions. Do not start them with dictionary definitions. Do not start them with famous quotations you found from some social networking meme. Instead, begin with something that is real. All right. When I'm looking at your introductions on your annotated bibliographies, almost all of you are starting with generalizations about how everybody is. Everybody is not one way. You need to give us a real source, a real look at something that really exists. So the example from our infomercial is when we get our woman who can't smile. Right. She's keeping her mouth closed, doesn't want to show her teeth. She's embarrassed, right? She's embarrassed. So you can see here that it evokes that feeling. When we get to our narration, our mantra here is we want to build the authority and build the groundwork for the terms of your proof. Those terms that we need to define when we get to your argument. You will use secondary research here. In fact, it will be the majority of what the narration is. You'll want a paragraph for each one of the secondary sources that are teaching you about the major issue that's at stake in your stories. This is those background, those existing conversation sources that you're supposed to be getting for your annotated bibliography. You will not use reference sources here. No encyclopedias, no Wikipedia, none of that. This is where we want those critical sources about your big issue or your primary texts. The example in our infomercial is the voiceover demonstrating that it has done the legwork to show us how much it costs to get teeth fixed. So that's going to be one term that the Snap-on Smile is going to have to address. It's going to have to be cheaper than the status quo. It's going to have to be less painful and less time-consuming than the status quo. It's also going to have to be less cumbersome to your life overall than the status quo. That's something you're going to want to think about when you're building your narration, is what is the status quo? And give us the status quo. The Romans used to call it doxa. And then when we get to your argument, which is going to be the majority of your research, you're demonstrating how your idea is better than or different from the status quo or different from doxa. So the division, this is an important part. It's so important that I'm actually going to spend the rest of this one video on this, and then we're going to start another one when we get into the proof. Okay, so the division, this is your central claim. This is the central nervous system of your whole entire argument. A lot of students resist me here and they say, well, my thesis statement is supposed to go at the end of my first paragraph. Listen, if you're doing your job correctly in the first 2 parts of this argument, we'll know what your point is. We'll know where you're going. And again, showing us is much more effective than telling us about it. After we have shown the stakes and shown the problem, after we've given us a sense of how that problem got there using authoritative secondary research, now we're going to come to you and you're going to say, okay, I've shown you that I've known all this stuff. Now we're going to break it down the way I want to break it down, right? It's called the division because this is where you define and divide things up. You're not going to have secondary research here. It's going to be one paragraph that is going to be the pumping heart that feeds everything else in your piece. All right. It should be, you should be thinking about division two different ways here. First, divide yourself from the herd. Second, divide your big idea into those terms that we talked about before spring break, right? You're going to want to divide your big idea into aspects. You're going to want to divide your crucial ideas into categories, or you're going to want to divide that issue into stages or into a process, all right? This is going to define the structure of everything else that's going to happen over the course of your essay. Don't be shy in this section. Err on the side of clarity. Again, this is the central nervous system, the motherboard, the brain of everything that you're writing about. And it's going to be really important that we know what those signposts are, those aspects, those categories, or those stages. So make sure you make it 100% clear. In the infomercial, they're very clear. That's after they show us grinding all the cost and everything that's involved in it. They tell us this thing's only going to take up less time. It's not going to be as cumbersome to your life, and it's not going to be as painful. Okay, so we're going to stop this first video here at the division. Again, if you haven't watched that infomercial, go ahead and watch that right now. We're going to get into the second half of the organizational strategy in the next video.